Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you might be in the world. Hello, and thank you for joining us here at the 7th Annual International HitLab Innovators Summit. We are so excited for this next presentation. I'm very honored to introduce Dr. Megan Coder, MBA, Executive Director of the Digital Therapeutic Alliance. DTA's mission is to broaden the understanding, adoption, and integration of clinically evaluated digital therapeutics into mainstream healthcare through education, advocacy, and research. With more than a decade of experience in the healthcare industry, Megan's expertise extends from strategic growth and partnership development within the digital health sector to the direct delivery of patient care. Prior to joining DTA, Megan worked with Voluntis, Iodine, the Pharmaceutical Care Management Association, and the Pharmacy Technician Certification Board. A proud Badger, Megan graduated from the University of Wisconsin Madison School of Pharmacy and completed an executive residency in association management and leadership with the American Pharmacists Association. It is my great pleasure to welcome Megan Coder. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure. And it's nice to meet each of you, albeit in a slightly less personal format. That said, today I'll be sharing my screen and have a number of slides to go through. And what I've been asked to speak to is much more focused on the regulatory side of this industry. So as I'm going through this, I will be touching a variety of topics. Welcome any commentary. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat function as we go. So that way, in case something comes up that's burning question or else that is just a curiosity, I'll do my best to answer that as we go too. So with that said, a quick overview of who we are. So as mentioned, I'm with the Digital Therapeutics Alliance, and our mission was really well stated, but by and large, boiling it down, we're really looking at ways to really look at how do we help patients, clinicians, payers, and regulators best understand how to utilize, evaluate, and really understand what this category of new products are. So with that said, DTA, our membership cuts across 15 different countries. So everything we speak to today really has the goal of, let's look at this not only from a regional area perspective, but also an international one, making sure that products have the same level of quality and rigor across the entire landscape and ecosystem, which I think is valuable for patients and clinicians across the board. So some of our member companies are here. It may help just for you to understand a bit more in terms of who we're working with on a day-to-day basis and the value that these different companies have in the digital therapeutic industry. So diving right on in, let's look at this from a higher level view. And these types of conversations have probably been had throughout this event so far. But when we're looking at digital health technologies, we're looking at a really broad ecosystem. So you have those types of products that are obviously on the enterprise support side. You have those that are supporting clinicians. You have patient-facing wellness products, in addition to those that step more into that digital medicine space of diagnostic and monitoring. And then you have direct therapeutic interventions. And that is really where digital therapeutics fit, is in that therapeutic intervention side, not necessarily their monitoring, diagnostic, adherence, or otherwise. That said, we recognize that all these products can really work well together and should work well together to really enable a cohesive ecosystem. But how do you start to break this down, especially from a regulatory side? So as I mentioned, one of the efforts we undertook last year was looking at how do we define digital health versus medicine versus therapeutics. And why this matters is that based upon where these products fit and really relate to the previous slide here in terms of the first three columns on your left being more of that digital health, the fourth one being medicine, and then the fifth one being therapeutic, there's different levels of requirements in terms of regulation and clinical evidence for these types of products. So by and large, digital health do not really require clinical trials, clinical evidence, or even regulatory oversight. Digital medicine, they do require both of those to differing degrees sometimes, but really as soon as you get into that diagnostic monitoring space, you're going to be subject to regulatory oversight. And then on the therapeutic side, not only do you have the clinical clinical requirements, but then you also have regulatory oversight in addition to the ongoing development of real world evidence. So with that overview, let me just take a real quick step back looking at now, or I guess in more detail, at digital therapeutics. So when we speak to this, we are really looking at those products that are delivering a therapeutic intervention to a patient and are using software to do so. And as such, only those products that are making the claim to treat, manage, or prevent a disease or disorder are considered to be a digital therapeutic product. As such, it's really important that they have a number of requirements that they have to look at in terms of let's make sure that the claims they're making are accurate and that the products are safe and that they're really adhering to the best practices across the industry from an ethical and also practice integrity standpoint. So these are the 10 principles that we developed as an alliance multiple years ago and still hold very closely to. So if any policymaker, healthcare decision maker, clinician, or patient wants to know, is this product in front of me, is it really a digital therapeutic and is it trustworthy? These are the types of questions we really recommend looking at. So you're looking at not only the types of claims being made, you're looking at making sure that software that's delivering that, not necessarily a human who's the final decision maker before the intervention goes to the patient. But then you're also looking at, does this product have the right manufacturing and best practices in terms of quality? Are end users engaged every step of the way through the design process? Does it really adhere strictly to security protections and then patient privacy and consent protections? All the way through, let's make sure that's deployed well. So is the product scalable? Once it hits the market, are there ways that a company can ensure that it is safe and effective in an ongoing manner, not just a one-time pass? Um, and then on the other side, we're looking at clinical trials. Most often, that's in the form of a randomized control trial. We're really looking to ensure that clinicians and decision makers have access to these endpoints and can determine, does this work for me? Does this fit with the patient population I'm looking for? And are the results robust enough that I can put my trust into this product? The rest of the presentation, we'll be talking a lot more about this regulatory realm. And this one here is of interest because as much as all of these other 9 principles apply across the industry internationally, the regulatory side has tended to differ from country and to country and region to region. So in some regions, digital therapeutics are very highly regulated, and every single product across the prevent, manage, and treat ecosystem are regulated at a fairly high degree. And then other regions, you'll see a lower level of regulatory oversight based upon the risk of the product. Whereas in the United States, you'll see the words like enforcement discretion pop up. And then comparing that then to MDR, where on the European side, we're seeing almost an upregulation into class 2A of most of these products. So that said, the last 2 on here, you have to make claims appropriate to your regulatory status and then collect and analyze ongoing real world data and outcomes. So real quick overview here. In terms of this slide, we're looking at, again, those 3 breakdowns of the subcategories under digital therapeutics: treat a disease, manage a disease, and then improve a health function / prevent a disease. You'll see the different levels of claims associated with each of these. You'll notice that the clinical endpoints, clinical evidence, are consistent across all 3 categories, regardless of the level of risk of the claim. But then that regulatory oversight will vary. And then in general, products that are in that treatment side generally do have a prescription requirement with it. Products in the managed can be either prescription or non-prescription. Obviously, there could be different considerations if you're in a country like Germany, where it's being required to be a part of the DIGA process right now. And then by and large, those on the prevent side are generally a non-prescription product. I won't spend too much here either, but really looking at this notion of digital therapeutics do have the ability to do many different things for patients to really address a wide variety of diseases. So we're looking at products that are not only delivering things such as cognitive behavioral therapy, but then we're also looking at the direct stimulation of neural networks. And then we're also looking at products that could dose your insulin for you or could help identify your triggers for asthma and help optimize the medication profile too for patients. So wide variety there. Regulatory, let's jump into this. So I think the best place for us to start here is the IMDRF. And IMDRF really is this forum that was conceived back in 2011 to really bring together the different members you see listed here: Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, and so forth. These members have come together to say, how can we start to harmonize what we're doing across our different regions? And I've seen many benefits result from this type of work already. Software as a medical device is one of the things that IMDRF proposed that I am most appreciative of. Looking at this, IMDRF came together quite early in the industry's development and really identified, hey, if there are software products that are medical devices, but have a different relationship to hardware as a traditional medical device does, how do we start to talk about how these are defined, how they're regulated, and looking at risk categorizations here. And then evaluation is an important aspect too. So what IMDRF did is they set up this entire ecosystem, and digital therapeutics, by and large, are a subset of SAMD. So SAMD and digital therapeutics are not equivalent to each other. There is definitely a notion where there are many other types of SAMD products that are not digital therapeutics. And there also could be some digital therapeutics that may qualify as a pure play medical device or a combination product. But for the most part, most digital therapeutics are software as a medical device. As such, a number of different agencies and entities have started to really implement these products, these frameworks, I should say. So FDA has been one of the first to really lead the way here. As some of you may know, FDA launched their Digital Health Center of Excellence a couple of months ago. So this is a division of the FDA now that has really come together to really congregate all of the thought leadership across the agency in terms of what are the best ways to evaluate and utilize these products, and how do we do that, bringing some consistency across the different divisions that are actually indeed reviewing these products. In April, FDA put out what is considered to be an EUA, an emergency use authorization. And COVID was still pretty early on. Obviously, as we know, we're still in December and dealing with much of this. But in April, FDA put out a guidance that said basically that digital therapeutics are actually a critical component of the nation's response to this emergency. And you see the quote that they put here. Not only was this the first time that the FDA used the term digital therapeutic in a formal capacity, but they also spoke to the benefits that these products provide. And while COVID is a very specific aspect here, many of the other notions here apply much more globally too in a post-COVID world also. What this basically allowed for was products to be able to go to market without having full regulatory oversight, even if they would require it traditionally, being very upfront in terms of here's the type of studies that have been done and that haven't been done. But with that, these products for mental health specifically were allowed to be distributed to patients, of which multiple different companies have taken advantage of this, and patients are already receiving therapies they wouldn't have otherwise had access to had this EUA not been submitted. Another aspect of FDA here is looking at their digital health software pre-certification program. And I really want to reinforce that this is a pilot program. Any product that goes through the pre-cert process at this time still has to go through the traditional 510K and de novo pathways. So with that said, though, pre-cert is a really interesting thing. For those who aren't familiar, I think the best way to describe it is looking at an idea of like a TSA pre-check program for those who are familiar with the United States. The notion is if a company can demonstrate that they have a strong history of a culture of excellence and quality processes in play, that they could actually have their products when there's iterations at hand or even potentially new products to be cleared, could have an expedited pathway review process, given that they've already accomplished many of the historical things. So the corollary for the TSA pre-check idea is if I'm going to go through security, I may not need to take off my shoes and take my liquids out of my bag, carry on, and I may be able to go through a quicker process as opposed to going through the entire long line every single time that you bring a new product to market and or do an iteration that really impacts the core algorithm of the product. The other thing I just learned about yesterday. So this may be old news for many of you, but for me, I had never heard of this. The FDA has a program that is called the Early Payer Feedback Program. And My understanding is that there's a list of payers, which are listed on the right-hand side of the slide, that sit in on a meeting with the product developer and the FDA to discuss what are the types of study designs that could or should be done to not only satisfy the FDA requirements, but then also payer requirements on the back end. My understanding is that you have to do this process before you would undergo a pre-submission process with the FDA. But that said, it was a program that apparently has actually a pretty decent history. And the notion of being able to sit down in front of these types of payers, which are fairly big names, including CMS and Cigna and Blue Cross Blue Shield and Aetna, is a really big deal. So I was really proud of the FDA for doing this. I had not known about this, as I said, until yesterday. So let's take a pivot, still in the United States. If we're looking at Medicare, so once you get products cleared into market, and I'll give the FDA full credit, they have done a fantastic job in really ensuring that products are able to get to market in a really efficient way from what I've seen so far. Where we run into problems is on the public payer side. Currently, Medicare does not have a way to currently recognize what a digital therapeutic is. So as you see here, and this is from an article that Lucia Savage wrote with one of her colleagues, and it looks at the types of benefit categories that CMS has. Digital therapeutics could technically, possibly to some degree, fit into DME, which is the durable medical equipment. It's a little bit of a finagling area there. I think it is definitely possible. I would love to see CMS update that category to really make it worthy of a digital therapeutic fitting in there. But since there's no way to have a digital therapeutic as the cross entire category really truly recognized by Medicare, we within the industry have been undertaking multiple pathways to try to create a new benefit category. So I won't spend much time here, but we've been trying to look through how do we help CMS, how do we help people on the Hill and otherwise understand not only the value of this category and the necessity of it, but then also proposing language for them to understand, here's how we could go about actually adopting this and using this type of language to really enable Medicare to recognize these products and therefore give patients under Medicare access to these products. Because in the United States right now, payers on the private side generally do provide access to digital therapeutics. On the public side, they don't. So that almost introduces a disparity of sort where entire populations do not have access to these products based upon the current regulatory frameworks. We put out a paper to really talk about some of these notions, really focusing on rural and underserved communities. It's on DTA's website. If you go to industry news, it's the first publication listed there. So anyways, just want to at least share that. Let me just take a few quick minutes to go over some things from an international perspective. In terms of other entities out there, obviously FDA has done a fantastic job. CMS has a little bit of work to do from my perspective on this one. But then if you look at what the United Kingdom is doing, back in March of 2019, NICE put out the first ever guidance here in terms of they stratified the types of products that are digital health technologies by what their functionality is. So you get to see, similar to the diagram I shared with you in the very beginning, the system services, so enterprise support, for lack of a better word. And then you move into more of that the clinician assistance or simple monitoring products that are more in that health and wellness space. And then you get much more into that tier 3, where you're looking at those that are actually diagnosing, calculating, and delivering therapies. What I really appreciated about this was that NICE not only laid out the levels of clinical evidence for each of these 3 categories, but they also laid out the levels of economic evidence required. So what levels of cost benefit analysis do you have to do, or what types of ROI do you need to show? And I had not seen a government agency go as far as being that specific. The other one I want to mention is within Germany. There's an entire process here that has been fascinating. So if you have some time, I would highly recommend going to check out more on BfArM's website. But by and large, Germany has implemented a program that's launching this year, looking at how do they provide access to digital health technologies, DIGA, of which digital therapeutics are a subset, of which now there are currently 5 technologies that are being given 1 full year on the German uh, market for I think 90 some percent of the population. Those companies set their own price. That's a negotiated rate. They have 1 year to collect a good amount of data, and then once they do that, that year ends, then they go and they do another full renegotiation process for a much longer period of time. Or if they weren't able to hit their endpoints, then it's possible that they would be removed from the healthcare ecosystem. But whereas the UK is very segmented in terms of who has access to what. Regionally, Germany, this system is nationwide. So I think there's a lot to be learned from Germany in this process here. One other one that I want to mention here is South Korea. So South Korea has been a really cool example of a country taking steps in a really quick turnaround in a really meaningful way. So my understanding is that in South Korea, from a regulatory standpoint and legislative wise, even digital therapeutics were by and large illegal is not the right word to use, but not allowed onto the market in that true capacity. With COVID and with a lot of the issues that have arisen from this, the government put in a plan, whereas in August, they put out an initial draft guidance of saying, we not only want to recognize what a digital therapeutic is, but figure out ways to actually scale them within the country. So this is the first step where even this month, gosh, it's December, last month, I guess, they came out with the English version of this document where they not only define digital therapeutics, they define them as a subset of SAMD also, but then they go through a number of other areas too. So we're seeing increasing amounts of regulation in Singapore, Japan, South Korea, and so forth. So really look forward to seeing how the regulatory ecosystem evolves from the Asia Pacific side too. I think yep, one more slide left, and then I'll go to the question that just came in. So one last aspect here that I think is always of interest, and I'm just intrigued by it, is looking at the regulatory side. Regulatory is a really good baseline in terms of, is it safe, is it effective? But then once it's on the market, then the questions come after that. What is the ongoing quality? Will it be consistent? And is it trustworthy for its entire life cycle? So one example of this was the US Pharmacopoeia has been looking at ways to figure out, could the development of a monograph, similar to what it looks like for a drug, be appropriate for the digital therapeutic side? So what kinds of quality standards would be there? What would an inactive ingredient or an active ingredient of a digital therapeutic be, much akin to that of the drug side? And ideally, from my perspective, I would love to see standards like this from them or others emerge to really help us identify, what does a counterfeit digital therapeutic look like and what does an adulterated digital therapeutic look like? It's not something we've really seen a lot in the industry right now, which is really encouraging. But as this industry grows and as digital therapeutics really become mainstream and taken up by patients and clinicians globally for many, many decades to come, there's going to be a lot of considerations that we as an industry need to make. So this is one of our first steps, and I really look forward to growing that as we go. So I am completing my presentation. Good, I have 5 minutes left. So I will stop sharing. I'll go into the chat and try to answer questions here. Okay, so the question is, can a minimal risk CMD be a device, or does it have to have a... Okay, I'm going to do my best to answer this question. So digital therapeutics, looking at this more just from the FDA side, I'm not as comfortable with breakthrough status in any other jurisdiction. Digital therapeutics are medical devices. That said, they may fall under a category called enforcement discretion, where they are subject to FDA oversight, but they don't have to submit for full clearance the same way that a product would do if you're a 510K or a de novo product. So the levels of risk will differ there. Breakthrough status, to me, oh, that's a really good question now that I think about it. So breakthrough status, I'm going to back that up. Breakthrough status is a process by which a company can say, we are the first of a kind coming to market. Here's something that does not exist for a treatment area, and a patients would have access to something completely new or innovative here. So some examples of companies in our space that have had breakthrough status include I believe Cognoa looking at autism diagnosis and even treatment for children. And then also MedRhythms recently had breakthrough status for their product in helping stroke patients rehabilitate their walking gait again after an incident. So once you get breakthrough status, you go through the FDA clearance process, and you may or may not receive clearance. But if you do receive clearance as a breakthrough product, Medicare, as an example, has been looking toward, and they have not passed this formally yet, but they've been looking at, is there a way that you would actually get 4 years of automatic coverage for your product being breakthrough status as soon as you go through the FDA process? So for me, that's one of the first times, aside from a parallel review process, I've seen this interaction between CMS and FDA. Um, I don't believe you can have enforcement discretion that's a breakthrough status. That is my guess, but I'd be happy to have other people jump in and correct me if I'm wrong on that one. Because you would have to have clearance to get the breakthrough status formally recognized.
Thank you, Megan. I do have another question here from the audience, if I may. This is coming from Adriana, and she's asking, what are the different access points that will develop for patients? Will pharma start to take a larger role in development?
Very much so. So when we first launched DTA, we had a really strong distinction between like the startup kind of companies who would develop digital therapeutics, and then the pharma life science who would be seen more as the ones to help with getting to market and scalability and things of that nature. Over the past 3 years, we've seen a major blurring of that line, which I'm thrilled to see. We have pharma company members who are not only developing digital therapeutics in-house, but they've done different versions of acquisitions. We've seen full partnerships that almost resemble drug deals, not drug deals, deals a pharma company would make for a drug development process, much akin to what they're doing now for the digital therapeutic side. So we have in-house development of digital therapeutics within pharmaceutical companies and then also partnerships. So that alone has been increasing. In terms of the access side, patients are seeing these as both the non-prescription and prescription side. Prescription does limit you to an authorized clinician. The non-prescription side, you're going to see a lot more variability in terms of employers possibly covering these, or health insurers coming up with standardized protocols, identifying that these patients with this level of acuity can automatically be given access to these products, whatever the case is. So there's a lot of creativity right now in terms of the access points, but then also how you can implement that globally.
Excellent, excellent. I just have one more question. I think we have time for just the one more. Kirthika is asking, can you provide some insights on how digital therapeutics will be used for value-based care?
Oh, it's really exciting. They have so much potential. But I have to admit, we're not quite there yet. Digital therapeutics, as you know, they develop data consistently. So you know when a patient's using it, where they're using it, how they're using it, and how they're doing, and what the outcomes are. So you have all these data points available to you. By and large, value-based contracting, risk-based contracting, or whatever the case is, has been a challenge for payers to try to execute on. So it's creating the right systems to get the right data at the right time to the right decision makers, evaluate that data, and then determine the structure of the contracts. So we've seen notions in this direction. We as an industry truly believe that digital therapeutics can be one of those first product lines to really make this happen, just given their innate ability to capture and execute on this data. But a lot of it falls back on the payer side too, of making sure they have the systems and processes in place. So it will be a partnership required for this, but I don't think we're fully there quite yet.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Megan. And we're just wrapping up here. I'd love to end on just kind of a fun note. What have you been doing to stay sane in the quarantine and in the face of COVID? Have you been binging anything good on Netflix? What can you share with us?
Well, I just found out I was possibly contact traced to somebody possibly. So I just got my COVID test yesterday. So we'll find out how that turns out. Honestly, I'm creating a value assessment guide for digital therapeutics for healthcare decision makers, and that is all of my free time. So digital therapeutics is life, #greatness. I don't know.
I love it. I love it. Keeping busy. Oh, as always, Megan. Thank you. It is an absolute pleasure and an honor to have you joining us here today. Once again, Dr. Megan Coder, MBA, Executive Director of the Digital Therapeutics Alliance. Thank you so very much. Really appreciate your time here today.
Thank you.
When we return, we'll be